According to neo-historians and supporters of the historical status quo, no legitimate researcher, author, or historian has ever taken Robert's claim to being Billy the Kid seriously. In this episode, I will be examining and briefly reviewing all of the books that promote Robert's claim to being Billy the Kid in the chronological order in which they were released. I will also be discussing researchers, authors, and historians who provided research or commentary relevant to Robert's case. Furthermore, I will also be discussing the qualifications and accomplishments of these researchers and authors and other pertinent information to see if the claims made by those that oppose Robert's claim have any merit. With that said, let us begin. Any discussion of books on Brushy Bill Roberts must start with Alias Billy the Kid by William V. Morrison and Dr. Charles Leland Sonnichsen, which was published by the University of New Mexico Press in 1955. Alias Billy the Kid was the first book to discuss Robert's claim and was co-authored by the man who discovered him, William V. Morrison. Morrison, who was a paralegal who received his law degree from LaSalle Extension University in 1940. Morrison was a court-appointed probate investigator who specialized in wills and bankruptcies. Morrison would work with various law firms throughout Missouri, Florida, and Texas. Since Morrison wasn't a member of the bar, his friends, attorney R.F. Roberts of Beaumont, Texas, and Ted Andrus of El Paso, Texas, would be the attorneys of record on William Henry Roberts' legal filings. Morrison was also a longtime member of the Missouri Historical Society and was also a highly respected researcher whose manuscripts and papers on the Maxwell Land Grant are often cited by authors and researchers and can be found at the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library in Springfield, Illinois, as well as the Missouri Historical Society. Morrison was also highly regarded for his research on the famous Mexican bandit and revolutionary Pancho Villa. And Morrison was credited with securing the first interview with the men who killed Villa, which was published in the winter 1959-1960 edition of Frontier Times, titled They Killed Pancho Villa, by Morrison and Sonnichsen. Morrison's recordings of his interviews with Villa's assassins can be found among the library collections at Stanford University. Morrison was also a direct descendant of the Maxwell family. His great-great-grandfather was Ferdinand Maxwell, who was Lucien Maxwell's brother. Morrison was also a voracious letter writer. In my collection of Morrison's papers, I have literally hundreds of letters Morrison wrote to various researchers, authors, and historians. He would also write full-length manuscripts and critiques of books, articles, and movies that featured Billy the Kid in the Lincoln County War. It should be noted that many neo-historians and supporters of the historical status quo have taken the modern position that Morrison was a con man out to make money by exploiting Robert's case for purely financial gain. However, none of these so-called experts ever even knew Morrison. They have no first-hand knowledge and no evidence whatsoever that he tried to profit from Robert's claim. In fact, in his contract with the University of New Mexico Press for Alias Billy the Kid, Morrison added the stipulation that proceeds from the book were to be used to pay for Robert's headstone and final expenses. The book was not a financial success. Morrison paid for all of Robert's legal and travel expenses in his effort to secure his pardon. Furthermore, Morrison preserved Robert's papers by microfilming them and donating them to various university and state historical society research libraries at great expense to himself. The microfilm collection, which Morrison titled William V. Morrison, Billy the Kid, Petition for Pardon, which consists of 4 complete rolls of microfilm. The first 2 rolls contain the petition for pardon, which consists of the actual petition and legal documents associated with the petition. It also contains the attached brief titled A Statement of Facts and Appendix A titled How Much Can Be Condoned, the unofficial coroner's verdict, and a determination of handwriting, which included a full report by a former document examiner and postal inspector George Sweat, a transcript of Billy Roberts' last interview with Morrison, following his failed meeting with Governor Mabry, an interview with Billy Roberts' widow Melinda Roberts, and interviews and affidavits. The second roll also contains a significant amount of information about the Maxwell family history. The third roll is labeled Part 2, Country Letters, and contains the entirety of Morrison and Roberts' correspondence beginning on April 9, 1949, and ending on December 26, 1950. It also contains correspondence with historians, research libraries, court clerks, and miscellaneous individuals who were interested in the claim of Roberts. The fourth roll contains a manuscript written by A.N. Blazer, titled 13 to 1 but a draw, detailing the regulator's shootout with Buckshot Roberts at Blazer's Mill, along with documents, photographs, and correspondence with Paul Blazer, whose family owned Blazer's Mill, the site of the killing of Buckshot Roberts and Dick Brewer. Paul Blazer also provided documents and photographs of the Mescalero Indian Reservation, as well as several newspaper and magazine articles. The fourth roll also contains correspondence between Morrison and the Missouri Historical Society. In addition to the microfilm, Morrison also donated physical and hard copies of several of his letters and manuscripts to various state university and historical society libraries. I will be discussing these manuscripts in future videos. Morrison's sincerity in his belief in Roberts and his integrity was never questioned by his peers, only by present-day neo-historians who never knew him. In a letter dated May 30th, 1989, to Robert Dyer, Dr. C.L. Sonnichsen wrote the following about Morrison's credibility being called into question. Quote, "I can assure you Morrison was a dedicated researcher, and in my view, an honest man. He was an enthusiast who went all out for whatever he believed in, but he was not thinking about money or reputation. It seems to me that there is some character assassination going on here, and I want no part of it." End quote. In another response about Morrison's character and background being called into question by Donald Klein, Dr. Sonnichsen wrote the following in a letter dated May 6, 1990, to Frederick Bean. Quote, "I can't see why it is necessary to attack a dead man who can't defend himself when he is only a minor part of the matter in hand. I am very sad about the whole business. Morrison, in my judgment, was really a fine man and a furious researcher. He was a voluminous letter writer and was as much dismayed as Mr. Klein is by sloppy investigation. He was always asking people to produce citations for their statements and making himself unpopular that way. And now he is being investigated? What a world." End quote. I would like to add that in addition to Morrison being respected by Sonnichsen, he was also not only friends, but respected as well by other notable Billy the Kid and Lincoln County War researchers and authors, like Phil Rash, Robert Mullen, Colonel Maurice G. Fulton, William Kelleher, Leon Metz, Carl Brehan, and many others. Dr. Charles Leland Sonnichsen received his Ph.D. from Harvard University in 1931. He was Benedict Professor of English at the University of Texas El Paso until retiring in 1972. He then served as editor of the Journal of Arizona History from 1972 to 1977. He was a highly respected Southwestern historian and folklorist, as well as a prolific author and screenwriter. He authored 35 books and won 3 Spur Awards. Additionally, Dr. Sonnichsen served as the 23rd president of the Western Historical Association. Alias Billy the Kid was written by Sonnichsen with research materials provided by Morrison. The book describes how Morrison discovered William Henry Roberts, who would eventually reveal himself to be the legendary outlaw, Billy the Kid. Alias then presents Roberts' story in his own words by using Roberts' tape-recorded interviews with William V. Morrison, as well as Roberts' notebooks that contained his life story. The book then describes Roberts' ill-fated meeting with New Mexico Governor Thomas Mabry in November of 1950, which resulted in Roberts having a stroke, which contributed to his death less than a month later at Hyco, Texas. Alias Billy the Kid, though not a financial success, did receive praise from many prominent individuals, such as President Harry Truman, who wrote in a letter dated May 19, 1955, to William V. Morrison, quote, "I can't tell you how much I appreciated the #1 copy of Alias Billy the Kid. I read it from cover to cover, and it is one of the most interesting documents I have run across. I have read a great many of the things that written about him and other westerns, including The Great and the Desperados, and this book is the most satisfactory arrangement with supporting documents that I have seen. It's too bad that the old man who called himself Billy the Kid could not have lived long enough to see another governor of New Mexico. He might have obtained a just decision." End quote. Acclaimed author and historian Leon Metz, in The Lincoln County War, a bibliographic essay, which is quoted in Billy the Kid: His Life and Legend by John Tuska, writes the following about Morrison and Sonnichsen, quote, "These two author historians presented evidence that the Kid did not die of Pat Garrett's bullet, but lived on under the alias of Brushy Bill Roberts. Although this version did not win much acceptance among historians, it was still a masterpiece of research. Information and documents turned up by Morrison and Sonnichsen dumbfounded many of the experts. Thus we have the interesting case of a book whose premise has been rejected, yet whose scholarly findings are a benchmark of what superb research is all about." End quote. In the book Inventing Billy the Kid, author Stephen Tatum writes the following about Alias Billy the Kid. Quote, "However one reacts to this account and its disturbing revelations, disturbing because Bill reconstructs certain events of the Kid's life in a manner familiar to only the most devoted Kid researchers." End quote. In the book Jesse Evans, Lincoln County Badman, authors Grady McCrite and James Powell write, quote, "Brushy Bill Roberts talked about places, named people, and described events of the Lincoln County days that astonish historians. Even though the experts do not generally accept his claim of being Billy the Kid, they find it very difficult to deny his presence in Lincoln during the Troubles. Several who knew Billy the Kid during the 1870s and early 1880s testified that Roberts was Billy Bonney. Others who knew Billy said Roberts was not. The book leaves the reader with the lingering thought, if Brushy Bill Roberts wasn't Billy the Kid, who was he?" End quote. It goes without saying, I highly recommend anyone interested in Roberts' case to read Alias Billy the Kid. The original, first edition if possible, as the reprint edition that I examined was missing the original footnotes contained in the first edition. And to me personally, the footnotes, endnotes, and source citations, especially in works of history, is what I believe truly make a great book. The Hyco Legend of Billy the Kid by Judge Bobby Hefner was the first of 3 books Judge Hefner would write about Brushy Bill Roberts, and was published by Hefner Printing in 1986. Judge Hefner served as a judge and justice of the peace in Precinct 3 in Hamilton County, Texas. He founded the Billy the Kid Museum in Hyco, Texas. He also founded the Cosby Library in Coppell, Texas. When Judge Hefner was a teenager, he actually met and befriended Brushy Bill Roberts, who would talk to Bob about cowboy life and horse riding. When Bob would ask him about his younger days, he would say he couldn't talk about it, and that he had a secret, and would quickly change the subject. The Hyco Legend of Billy the Kid contains a brief overview of Roberts' claim to being Billy the Kid, and contains several newspaper articles and documents relevant to Roberts' claim, including the first published account of Roberts' application for pardon with the attached brief titled A Statement of Facts. The Hyco Legend of Billy the Kid also included some of Dr. William A. Tunstall's research. It should be noted that Judge Hefner, Dr. Tunstall, and Dr. Janae Valdez were all friends, and they all shared, cooperated, and contributed to each other's books. All 3 men selflessly and generously shared materials with me as well while I was writing my book, which I'll discuss later in the video. The Hyco Legend of Billy the Kid used to be available for purchase at the museum in Hyco, but I'm not sure if it still is today, as I haven't visited the museum since Judge Hefner turned it over to the city of Hyco. It can usually be found at online sites like abe.com, eBay, or Amazon. Billy the Kid and Me Were the Same by Dr. William A. Tunstall was published in 1988 by the Western History Research Center. Dr. Tunstall was a graduate of Stanford and Texas Christian universities. He was a teacher and administrator for the Fort Worth School District for almost 40 years. Dr. Tunstall was a respected historian who served as chairman of the Billy the Kid Research Committee, to which other respected historians belonged, such as Professor Elvis Fleming, Kenneth Ostheimer, and Colonel Stuart Pritchard. He also founded the Western History Research Center in Roswell, New Mexico. Dr. Tunstall's book contains several documents, photographs, and interviews relevant to Robert's case. It contains interviews with Robert's relatives, shows a detailed family tree, marriage records, and land records that he used to verify Robert's genealogy. In addition to these finds, Tunstall was the first to make the Jesse Evans-Joe Hines claim, which I'll get more into later, and he was able to prove that the Billy the Kid letters to Governor Lew Wallace were written by multiple individuals by producing a report by the New Mexico State Police Chief Document Examiner. Furthermore, Bill Tunstall was responsible for obtaining the recording and transcript of the Maury Davidson interviews, taken on September 6, 1949 at Merrimack Caverns in Stanton, Missouri. Among those interviewed by Davidson was Brushy Bill Roberts. Before his death in 2001, Dr. Tunstall sent me this recording, as well as the transcript of the interviews, as well as his files. After I received the recording, I made copies available for listening while I was the archivist at the Billy the Kid Museum in Canton, Texas, which was run by my good friend, the late Dr. Janae Valdez, who would often make copies of the recording and give them to visitors and would even mail them, usually at his own expense, to anyone who might request a copy but wasn't able to visit the museum in person. I say this because copies of these recordings are appearing here on YouTube, and I don't recall any of these videos crediting Dr. Tunstall for finding them or Dr. Valdez for gifting them their copy. I don't mean to sound petty in complaining about this, but Hefner, Tunstall, and Valdez were all extremely generous with their discoveries with other researchers and never asked to be compensated other than by being credited for their contributions. And since all three men are no longer with us, I'm extremely protective of their legacies and contributions. So please keep that in mind. I truly believe that if it wasn't for Bill Tunstall, the Maury Davidson interviews would have been lost to history. I have his correspondence with Davidson, which led to him coming into possession of these recordings, and I might make a video on that in the future, as it was quite interesting how it all played out. Billy the Kid and Me Were the Same is definitely a must for any serious researcher interested in Robert's case. It is long out of print and can be difficult to find at times, but usually can be found with a little effort online. The Trial of Billy the Kid, by Judge Bobby E. Hefner, was published in 1991 by Bosque River Publishing and was the second book on Brushy Bill by Judge Hefner. Judge Hefner used his knowledge of the law and experience as a Hamilton County judge and justice of the peace to assemble statements made by Roberts, Billy the Kid, and others relevant to the life of the kids in the form of a courtroom testimony. He applies the rules of law and evidence to the proceedings and presents them as the trial of Billy the Kid, to determine whether or not Brushy Bill Roberts was the kid. The book was the first to publish the facial recognition study conducted by the University of Texas Austin and was the first to make the claim that Joe Hines was Jesse Evans by quoting correspondence between Dr. William A. Tunstall and the Texas Department of Corrections. I will get more into this later on in the video. The Trial of Billy the Kid was released not long after Young Guns 2 was released, which really ignited the spark in the public's interest in Robert's claim to being Billy the Kid. The book is well written and definitely worth picking up and can usually be found online with minimal effort. Billy the Kid Killed in New Mexico Died in Texas by Judge Bobby E. Hefner and Dr. Janae P. Valdez was published by Outlaw Publications in 1995 and would be Judge Hefner's third book about Brushy Bill Roberts, and was a collaboration between he and Dr. Valdez. The book takes a deep dive into Robert's claim and details Brushy's story and contains additional research into Robert's background from his genealogy, his childhood, his time in New Mexico, and his later years until his death in 1950. The book contains several affidavits, pictures, documents, and letters that support Robert's claim. The book was primarily written by Dr. Valdez. Dr. Janae P. Valdez held 6 degrees and received his Ph.D. in education from Texas A&M Commerce. He was the Dean of Hill College and was the author of several books, and was the curator at both the Billy the Kid Museum of Canton, Texas, and the Outlaw Museum. Billy the Kid Killed in New Mexico Died in Texas is a fantastic book and is easy to read as it is presented in a more traditional form as it reads like a story, whereas some nonfiction books read like a glorified book report or research paper. Make no mistake though, this book is packed with documents and new information not contained in earlier books. I highly recommend this book, and I've reread it numerous times. I'd like to add that as I was developing this series, I originally wanted to just provide the research and Dr. Valdez to do the voiceover, as he is a much better public speaker than me. But unfortunately, he got sick and wasn't able to do it. Before he passed away, he did contribute research to one episode on the shooting at Fort Sumner that will appear in the next chapter of this series. Billy the Kid Killed in New Mexico, Died in Texas is long out of print. However, it can be found online with a little bit of effort. The Return of the Outlaw Billy the Kid by W.C. Jameson and Frederick Bean was published in 1998 by the Republic of Texas Press. W.C. Jameson, or William Carl Jameson, is an accomplished author, musician, and educator. He is the author of more than 100 books, 1,500 published articles and essays, and 400 songs. He has won 3 Stirrup Awards for his writings. In 1994, Jameson served as president of the Western Writers of America, and in 1995, Jameson held the same post at the Ozark Creative Writers Association. Jameson received his undergraduate degree from the University of Texas El Paso, where he was a student of Dr. C.L. Sonnichsen. He received his master's and doctorate of philosophy at the University of Oklahoma. In my opinion, with perhaps the exception of C.L. Sonnichsen, W.C. Jameson is the best pure writer of Brushy Bill Roberts' books. Frederick Bean is the author of more than 35 books, including the critically acclaimed Lorena, The Pecos River, Eden, and Hell's Half Acre. Bean was a member of the Western Writers of America, during which he has led numerous workshops and panels on the art of writing. The Return of the Outlaw Billy the Kid contains the transcripts of Morrison and Roberts' interviews transcribed by Frederick Bean, who was granted access to the recordings by Robert's step-grandson Bill Allison. Allison's grandmother Melinda was married to Roberts when he died in 1950. Bean's transcript closely mirrors those contained in Alias Billy the Kid by Morrison and Sonnichsen. The Return of the Outlaw Billy the Kid goes beyond that, though, and offers a detailed analysis of Roberts' case, presenting additional evidence not known at the time Alias Billy the Kid was released, as well as including some of the information discovered by Tunstall and Hefner. It also includes the facial recognition study by the University of Texas Austin. If you come across this book, it is definitely worth picking up. However, I would recommend Billy the Kid Beyond the Grave by W.C. Jameson instead, as it's basically an updated version of this book. The Real Billy the Kid, aka Brushy Bill Roberts, by Brett L. Hall, was published in 2003 by Lulu Press. My book is unique in that it consists of 384 pages, of which 174 are notes, source citations, and documents. My favorite part of any book of historical study is the sources, for they are what truly determines whether the claims made in the manuscript can withstand scrutiny and is the ultimate determination as to whether it has any merit. In my book, I take Robert's words and break them down and see if they can be verified by sources, much like my videos here. I also revealed that the true identity of Joe Hines wasn't Jesse Evans, but William Campbell. I cite a letter by Morrison that states this, as well as cite statements made by Roberts to Morrison which confirm this as well. My book features an introduction by my good friend, the late Dr. Janae Valdez, who along with Judge Hefner and Dr. Tunstall shared their research materials with me while working on my book. Dr. Valdez also accompanied me on many interviews with descendants of Morrison and others who had information or materials relevant to Robert's case. My book is currently out of print, as I'm in the process of updating it and plan on re-releasing it later on this year to mark its 20th anniversary. It can be found sometimes on used book sites for those interested. Billy the Kid Beyond the Grave by W.C. Jameson was published in 2005 by Taylor Trade Publishing. Billy the Kid Beyond the Grave is basically an updated account of the return of the outlaw Billy the Kid. It does contain some new information not contained in the earlier release. This is a fantastic book that I believe any student of Roberts'claim should seriously consider. This book is easy to find and can be found on most book sites. Billy the Kid, The Lost Interviews by W.C. Jameson was originally published by Garlic Press in 2012. A second edition was published in 2017 by Creative Text Publishers. In this book, author W.C. Jameson gives the details of the late Frederick Bean's experience in obtaining, describing, and transcribing William V. Morrison's tape-recorded interviews with William Henry Roberts. Jameson also included some of the information from his previous books on Roberts. He also presents Roberts' words in a question-and-answer type format not included in the original transcript, which resulted in the book being classified technically as a work of fiction. However, Roberts' answers are faithful to the original transcripts, and the facts presented in the book are basically the same as his earlier works, which are classified properly as non-fiction. I say this because some neo-historians have attacked this book for this reason. This only applies to the second edition. Billy the Kid, an Autobiography by Daniel Edwards, was published in 2014 by Creative Text Publishers. Most of this book is basically almost word for word the same as Alias Billy the Kid. It even incorporates some of the original footnotes that appeared in Alias Billy the Kid in the main body of the text. So at times, it can be difficult for someone new to Robert's story to discern what words are from Alias Billy the Kid and what are the words of the author. It also contains the documents from Alias Billy the Kid as well. So this is really a nice substitute for someone who can't locate a copy of Alias Billy the Kid, which used to be a really difficult thing to do. The edition that I have does not contain any footnotes or endnotes, and some claims aren't sourced at all. For instance, early in the book, the author reveals that Joe Hines' true identity was Jesse Evans. Hines was the man who initially revealed to Morrison that Roberts was Billy the Kid. However, Edwards doesn't reveal exactly how he discovered this. I assume he learned this from the trial of Billy the Kid by Judge Bob Hefner, who cites William Tunstall's letter from the Texas Department of Corrections in that book. But since it's not sourced, that's just a total guess on my part. However, I don't recall the author mentioning Tunstall, Valdez, or Hefner in his book at all, so that might not be the case. And this might not be the case with other editions of the book. Edwards does do a good job of mixing in some new information on the second half of the book. Particularly, he offers some interesting theories on Roberts' time in the Spanish-American War and when Roberts was known as the Texas Kid. In my opinion, this is the best part of Edwards' book and why I recommend it. It also contains some interesting photo comparisons and overlays of Roberts and the famous tintype of Billy the Kid. Edwards' book is well written and easy to follow and is a good book for someone to begin their research of Roberts. It is readily available and is easy to find as it's available at most online bookstores. Cold Case, Billy the Kid, Investigating History's Mysteries by W.C. Jameson was published in 2018 by Two Dot Publishing. This is truly a unique book that takes a fresh look at Billy the Kid and Roberts'claim by using forensic science and modern investigation techniques. The book discusses the crime scene investigation at the old Lincoln County Jail, DNA, blood tests, and other pertinent information about Billy the Kid. Parts of this book are similar in theme to The Dirty on Billy the Kid by Steve Cedarwall, who is mentioned throughout the book. Roberts isn't the sole focus of the book. However, it does mention him throughout and compares his statements to the findings, which validates his claims. I believe even those that don't give any credence to Roberts'claim will enjoy this book. It can easily be found at most sites. These are the books I recommend anyone interested in researching Roberts'claim read. However, there are others who supported Roberts'claim that didn't write books about Roberts, but still deserve to be acknowledged for their contributions. First and foremost is acclaimed author and historian E.B. Mann. Mann was present at Roberts' meeting with New Mexico Governor Thomas Mabry on November 29, 1950. Mann was impressed with some of the things Roberts had to say and would later support Morrison's efforts behind the scenes and later published Alias Billy the Kid by Morrison and Sonnichsen when he was the director of the University of New Mexico Press. In a letter dated February 11, 1983, from E.B. Mann to William Tunstall, Mann wrote, quote, "I am certainly interested in your research regarding Brushy Bill Roberts. I agree that the Morrison move of applying to Governor Mabry for a pardon was ill-timed, if not entirely ill-advised. I was there, and the poor little man Roberts was so appalled by the confrontation with police and other officialdom, including Garrett's sons, that he made a poor showing. Incidentally, have you had access to Morrison and Sonnenschen's unpublished materials? They had a great quantities of recordings of discussions with Roberts and of talks with other people, much of which never got into the book. Some of that material might tie in with your own discoveries. One thing that impressed me was their discussion with an old Mexican who had always claimed that Billy spent the night with him in a sheep camp. He said Billy arrived riding a white mare. In a separate talk with Roberts, he finally remembered that he had spent a night with a Mexican kid in a sheep camp and that he was riding a white mare. He said that the horse he rode out of Lincoln had gone lame and he stole the mare out of Chisholm's pasture. I was afoot, he said, and she was all I could catch. Knowing the old cowboy aversion to white mounts and to mares, this unanimity of remembrance struck me as remarkably convincing." End quote. Edward Beverly Mann was an accomplished Western writer, historian, and folklorist. He authored more than 20 books, many of which have been adapted to film. Mann co-wrote the definitive book on New Mexico's history with fellow author Fred Harvey, titled New Mexico, Land of Enchantment. Mann received his degree from the University of Florida in 1927, and in 1948 he was named the director of the University of New Mexico Press, a position he would hold on to until 1956 before leaving to become the editor for Guns magazine. He also served as the editor for the American Rifleman and wrote several newspaper and magazine articles. He contributed regularly to Field and Stream magazine. The New York Times wrote that Mann, quote, knows how to use the authentic background of the Old West, and that he was good at characterization. The Times also called him, quote, the best of the young writers of Western stories, end quote. Mann was inducted into the Osborne County Hall of Fame, and his papers can be found at the American Heritage Center at the University of Wyoming. Kenneth F. Ostheimer was co-chair of the Billy the Kid Research Committee based out of Roswell, New Mexico. He had a master's degree from the Ohio State University and wrote one of the most interesting unpublished manuscripts on Billy the Kid that I've ever come across in my more than 30 years of researching Roberts'claim. In his manuscript, Ostheimer makes a compelling case that Billy's exploits were pushed in the press by the Santa Fe Ring in order to take attention away from their shady dealings and captivate the public's attention with his activities. In the book, Tall Tales and Half-Truths of Billy the Kid, author John Lee May writes the following about Kenneth Ostheimer, quote, in his unpublished manuscript, The Cover-Up Behind the Legend of Billy the Kid, author Kenneth F. Ostheimer puts forth the interesting notion that Billy the Kid's posthumous legend was created by the Santa Fe Ring, which secretly ruled the New Mexico Territory in the 1800s. In essence, the Kid's legend was created and immortalized to draw attention away from the Ring's land-grabbing antics in the Lincoln County War. In Ostheimer's own words, pro-Ring writers slur over or omit discussions of such Ring activities and center their attention on the alleged activities of Billy the Kid. Among those alleged pro-Ring writers was Ash Upson. End quote. Ostheimer conducted several interviews with people who knew Roberts. I will be going into greater detail on Ostheimer's work in future episodes. Mr. Melton F. Haley was a longtime resident and historian from Fort Sumner, New Mexico. Mr. Haley lived just a short distance from the Billy the Kid Museum in Fort Sumner and was a vocal supporter of Brushy Bill Roberts' claim to being Billy the Kid. He married Emma Herron, who was the granddaughter of Jim Herron, who is known as the first sheriff of No Man's Land. I recommend the book 50 Years on the Owl Hoot Trail for anyone interested in learning more about Jim Herron. Herron, who had run afoul of the law himself and was accused, tried, and convicted of rustling cattle, often told of running into Billy the Kid during his cattle rustling days, specifically stating that he and Billy would both acquire cattle in Mexico and sell them in Texas and New Mexico. He told several people that he saw Billy several times before and after his reported killing in Fort Sumner in 1881. Tourists would often stop Melton in town and ask him where to find the grave of Billy the Kid, and he would usually respond by giving them directions to Brushy Bill Roberts' grave in Hamilton, Texas. I have a video of Dr. Janae Valdez interviewing Mr. Haley on my channel, and I'll post a link to the interview on the end screen, as well as in the description box below. And last but certainly not least, I would like to acknowledge Emily Smith of Hayden Lake, Idaho, who is currently writing a book about Brushy Bill Roberts. Emily has played a vital behind-the-scenes role in researching Roberts'claim. She was an active participant in the 2004 investigation that attempted to conduct DNA testing on the body in Fort Sumner, Catherine Antrim, John Miller, and Brushy Bill Roberts. She has authored several articles and written many letters in support of Roberts'claim, as well as responsible for introducing Melton Haley to Dr. Valdez and myself back in 2006. Emily, along with Clyde Carpenter, run the Brushy Bill Roberts Facebook group page, and I highly recommend any Brushy Bill Roberts enthusiasts check it out. I will post links to the Facebook group page along with interviews and speeches from Dr. Tunstall, Dr. Valdez, Judge Hefner, and Mr. Haley. So there you have it, a list of Brushy Bill Roberts books and authors. I'll leave it to you to decide if these men are real historians or not. The fact that Sanderson was literally the president of the Western Historical Association, and Jameson was the president of the Western Writers of America, pretty much speaks for itself. Not to mention some were Hall of Fame writers, educators, held master's degrees or PhDs, and one was even a judge. I would put up the credentials of these men with any put forth by those that support maintaining the historical status quo. In my next video, I will continue with the next chapter in Brushy Bill Roberts in his own words, where I will examine the facts surrounding the shooting at Fort Sumner in July 1881. Until next time, stay tuned, and thank you for watching. And if you enjoy my videos, please help grow the channel by liking and subscribing. Thank you.